Good afternoon. So here we are again with another video to try and help you to liberate your minds. And the last video I did seemed to strike a chord with quite a few people, and it was all about connection and intimacy. So I thought I would carry on with this theme of relationships, and if you're dating or if you're in a relationship, what I'm going to discuss today could be quite helpful for you because it will help you to understand yourself and your partner and the dynamics between you a lot better so that you can start to improve the quality of your relationships, your connection, your interactions with each other. So, as the title says, this is going to all be about attachment styles or attachment types. Now, there are quite a lot of experiments and research now done into the field of attachment theory, which is what they call it. And a lot of it is very interesting. A lot of it is very helpful. However, my argument would be that they do tend to, in certain psychological fields, pigeonhole and then diagnose or help someone understand what their type might be, but then they're kind of like, now you're going to have to learn to live with it or cope with it or find coping strategies in a very conscious way. But it's almost like you're labeled, you're pigeonholed, and now you're destined to live within that model or that diagnosis. And I don't believe it has to be that way. And the reason I can say that is because I've helped a lot of people to change their attachment style. So what is an attachment style? So essentially, there is actually a part of the brain that they label as the attachment system within the brain. And that is the part of your brain that wants you and encourages you to find partners and mates and things like that. And from obviously an evolutionary point of view, that's good because we haven't sort of gone extinct like some of the other animals that have been in existence in the past. So it's definitely necessary, especially when it comes to raising kids, because obviously children were more likely to survive if both parents stayed together and worked together to nurture and help that child grow into a fully formed adult. However, there are different attachment styles, and when that system gets activated, and it gets activated in a positive way and a negative way, in the sense that it encourages us to want to have connection and get involved in relationships, but it also gets triggered when that relationship is either threatened and may potentially come to an end, or if you're one of the types, it will get triggered to then pull away, right? So I'm going to talk about what the three main types are, and then the characteristics of those types. And then I'm going to tell you how to kind of improve or manage the type that you are, or completely change the type to a point. All right. So the three main types are anxious, or secure, or avoidant. So let's break those down. What is an anxious attachment style? So an anxious attachment style would be someone that is very motivated by wanting to have a partner and to be close with that partner and have a very tight bond with that partner, right? They feel safest, most secure, and tend to thrive when they have a very close relationship with their partner. And what will happen is that if there are circumstances where the potential of that bond is threatened, then they tend to have what we call protest behaviors. It activates these protest behaviors, which will then be, they will start to call up their partner or encourage connection, or, start to put things in the diary, or start to get clingy, or, whatever it might be. They will start to try and get that until that's soothed, until they get the confirmation message back that actually everything's solid and safe and it's okay. Then they can relax and their attachment system gets switched off again, and then they feel comfortable. So This is quite a common one, actually, and a lot of people will have certain aspects of this, so it's not like you're either all or nothing. You'll have certain tendencies, certain situations that might make you feel a bit like that, but someone that's a very strong anxious type is going to be affected more than most, right? The secure is someone that is very motivated by connection and loves that closeness and that bond, but they're also very secure within themselves. So they're not triggered very often by their partner maybe displaying certain traits of avoidant or attachment style. They're very comfortable within themselves on their own or with a partner. They want a partner, but they have a very healthy relationship with themselves, and therefore they don't take things personally or get triggered as easily. The avoidant type are when someone is getting clingy or trying to get closer to that partner, then they tend to pull away. And the reason they tend to pull away is because they see it as a potential threat. The irony is that actually it's about abandonment. It's funny, they almost are trying to avoid getting too close because there's a fear of being abandoned, and therefore they'd want to abandon you first, or kind of not allow you to get too close or too connected or too far in or get to know them too well, because there's a part of them that's afraid that at some point if they do that, they're either going to find out who you really are and leave, or that they will just leave anyway at some point. And it's the worst combination is when you get an anxious and then an avoidant coming together, because of course the avoidant naturally wants to keep a level of independence. They like to keep their partner at a bit of an arm's length. They might be quite mixed messages. They don't sort of communicate very well. And that, of course, triggers the anxious person's attachment system. And then, of course, to get that security that they need in order to calm down, they get more attached. They try and come closer and they try and get that. And, of course, then the avoidant pulls away. So it's this push and pull kind of situation until eventually this person will completely leave and this person will then break down, and then they will start to feel that kind of bitterness against all men are like this. But the point is, when you understand that it's really not all men or anything, it's just that people tend to go for partners that are not an appropriate attachment style for them, right? Now, some bad news is going to be that if you are dating, like myself, and you go onto these kind of dating apps, you are going to find that a lot of, if not most, are going to be avoidant types, which is why and you'll see these people that are on there, like you may have like dated and been in several relationships, and every time you go back to the app, they're still there. And it's usually because of that. And, you know, don't get me wrong, they want relationships. They just can't handle it when the person gets too close. So they tend to then pull away and then eventually fully pull away. Or they may not want to be in a committed relationship at all. They might just need some kind of intimacy, but then they can't actually commit. And of course, that then tends to mess up anxious types, and secure types won't put up with it very long. The thing with the secure type is they're very good at working with a partner, in the sense that they can understand that a person needs space and they won't take it personally, and therefore they can accommodate that. Just like when they understand that someone gets anxious if they don't call or they don't communicate properly, they will do that. And one thing to say is anxious types, there's nothing wrong with them per se. Actually, once they have a partner that is secure or of a similar style to them, which is anxious, so that they are both constantly reassuring each other and therefore they can then thrive, and they do thrive. They've actually found that when you have that communication and that healthy combination of attachment styles in place, then both people feel secure enough to then take risks and start to be more independent. So the irony is, the more kind of, it's like a bit of a paradox, isn't it? Like the more you kind of cater to that anxiousness, the less anxious they are, in a sense. So it's almost like once you understand that and you give a person what they need, then they're less clingy. It's a bit of a paradox in that way. So what I would say though is that secure types are quite hard to come by because they're as secure and they're mostly in relationships. But what you have to say as well is that they do. It's not all about you're either one of these things and then you're stuck with it. I would suggest, and I can say this again as I said because I work with a lot of people, is you can. So let's talk about where these things have come from. You can change these things, right? So let's talk about where it comes from. So there is arguments about the nature or nurture thing, right? Whereas some people are born that type, some people develop that type. So let me give you a bit of a background here. The kind of argument for the nature is the sense that they did the tests on children that are very young, and they'll put it on, and they call the test the strange situation test, right? So a mother and their child get taken into a room where there are lots of toys, lots of exciting things to do, and the mother just sort of sits there, and the child then goes off to start playing with some of the toys. There's a researcher in the room from the off, and it's a friendly researcher, everything's good. But then what happens is the parent purposely then leaves the room. They don't tell the child they're going to leave the room. They just leave the room quietly. And as soon as the child notices that the parent has left, it activates that attachment system. And it's interesting to see which type they are. So the avoidant person doesn't seem bothered, right? The child doesn't seem that bothered. However, even though that looks like that on the surface, they did measure that the cortisol levels had gone up and the heart was going and everything else, which is quite interesting. Even though on the surface they didn't appear to mind that much. Obviously, the anxious type lose it and get really upset. They start going to the door and the researcher tries to comfort them and they're like throwing things at the researcher and all the rest of it. So basically, it's very interesting. So they would argue that that is a kind of ingrained part of it. Secure types, again, less upset, but were very reassured when the parent came back. So, you kind of get a sense of the three types, but again, not everybody's born like that. You can inherit stuff. Just like I would say, you can inherit hay fever, but that doesn't mean you can't change it. And it's a lot of people are quite surprised when I say you don't have to suffer with hay fever, right? You can come to someone like me and we can resolve that, because actually hay fever is part of a trauma response. And if you release the trauma involved in that and recondition the body to not see that as a threat anymore, you can actually fully release that physical reaction that happens in the body. And the same is true for attachment styles, in the sense that there are reasons people have had traumatic incidents as children, and they have now coping mechanisms or protective mechanisms that come up, like anxiousness and overthinking and processing and all of that. So, you can change that. But so, you can learn to manage these things, or you can actually go to a therapist and deal with the root cause of them, and everybody can become more secure, right? Because when you're more secure within yourself, you are less triggered by the behaviors of other people. Your attachment system actually starts to change. So it's worth knowing that. So again, what I would say is a lot of the avoidant types are often people that have come out of relationships, especially men, actually, who have been in relationships where they have felt trapped. They haven't had and this is quite a regular thing, unfortunately, a lot of people do not have the strength to leave a relationship. So if they were very traumatized as a kid and they have a relationship that they get into and they're an anxious type, for example, then what can happen is once they jump in with both feet and 6 months to a year in, they realize it's not a good relationship, healthy for them. But if the person is quite a strong personality, has a bit of a temper on them, they might be a bit of a narcissist and all the rest of that, then they find themselves in a situation where they don't actually feel that they can break away from it because they're too frightened about the repercussions of trying to break up with that person. So they tend to get stuck in it. Now, if they're lucky enough to then get out of that relationship, then what can happen is they can develop an avoidance style. So this is the other thing that can happen. You can actually become an anxious avoidant, in the sense that they were initially an anxious person, But now, because they've been in a relationship where they have experienced that trapped feeling and that trauma associated with that, they're still desperate for connection. But when they get into a relationship and then that person, it starts to get serious and they start to say, let's do this and let's get into a relationship, will you marry me, and all the rest of it, the trauma gets activated and now they pull away. Because then they start to look for, and this is one of the traits of an avoidant type, they look for faults, they look for impurities, they look for defects, they look for any reason, because when their attachment style gets triggered, what they tend to do is they look to deactivate, right? They look to find ways to pull away from the person. And one of those things will be to look for faults in appearance, in sense of humor, or in intellect, or all kinds of things. And so they idolize what the perfect person will be for them. And when they start to feel that the person in front of them wants to get serious with them, they're constantly looking for the reasons to pull away from that person. Now, if they're an anxious avoidant because of what's happened to them in their experience, it really is a push and pull. They're desperate for connection, but actually getting committed into a relationship is terrifying for them because they've been trapped before, and their amygdala now is looking out for the characteristics of, or the conditions that created that fear and that trapped feeling before, and that's getting into a relationship. So getting into a relationship can become a very triggering thing for a person. And, you know, just labeling it as you're an anxious avoidant, live with it, isn't very helpful, because you can come to a therapist and release that trauma and deactivate those anxious protective systems and change those limiting beliefs about yourself and those emotional reactions that you have to certain things. So essentially, once you've released all of those things, you're just who you are now with a healthy self-esteem, and you won't be thinking about all the relationships you've ever had. You'll just be having that conversation with that person and staying in this logical, rational part of the brain so that you can see a situation as it is. Because the other thing to say is when you do get triggered into your attachment style, in the sense that your system gets triggered, you tend to move into the part of the brain that goes into survival, right? So you're not thinking clearly, you're thinking negatively, you're obsessing. And you've probably felt like this, you know, when so maybe you've had a bit of an argument with your partner, and then you're stewing on it and you're kind of going around in circles. What does this mean? I call it doing the what if dance, right? Where you essentially, you're kind of all these different possibilities that are really kind of negative, catastrophizing, I guess you could call it. And by the end of that, you've really stressed out your body, because your body can't tell the difference between imagination and reality. So you're convinced that person is now going to break up with you. And then you can be shocked to find later on they're like, I'm over it, it's fine, let's get back on track. And you're like, oh, but you didn't have a choice, right? And it doesn't matter how many of those situations happen that work out in the end. The moment your body gets triggered, you forget all about that and you go straight into that fight or flight negative or primitive thought pattern loop, which is why they call it being loopy, right? You get stuck in a loop. So I suppose my message is today, it's all about understanding your preferences or your type so that you know what your tendencies are. If you know that you have insecurity issues and you're quite an anxious type in the sense that you need constant communication and reassurance that your relationship is solid, and you start dating somebody that's a very avoidant person, then you're always going to feel overwhelmed, because their whole thing is about not communicating, staying independent, you know, being aloof, not really opening up to you, or whenever you get close, they pull away a little bit, right? They might keep you just hanging in there enough to not want to break up with them until they feel like they can't handle it anymore and they leave. And it's like a vicious cycle. Now, something else to say is that often when an anxious person meets a secure person, they often misunderstand the situation because they're so used to dating these avoidant types that are quite difficult to work out and a little bit. And at the beginning, you know, when you're dating, it's quite exciting, isn't it? That uncertainty. You don't know what they're thinking. Do they like me? Is it, there's that kind of courting etiquette, the little dance that you do at the beginning, and that's quite exciting, right? However, a secure person doesn't do a lot of that. They tend to be, this is who I am, this is what I offer, I'm pretty comfortable with myself. And to someone that's used to the other type and their system being triggered and that uncertainty and that, they see that almost as excitement. So they see that secure types are boring, right? When actually, if they'd, and that's what this whole thing about nice guys, often these kind of like nice guys are secure types and they're not exciting. They're just very, what you see is what you get. This is who I am. I'm just a nice guy. I'm just genuine. I'm just authentic. And I just want to settle down and have a nice relationship. Whereas the avoidant types tend to be that kind of player, the game players, and the person that kind of likes to keep their options open, keeps you guessing, which is exciting for a little while. But the moment you then get into that, trying to get committed with that person, they start to pull away. And again, that sort of makes you want them more initially, but then eventually it all comes crashing down. And then that's another man. Why do I always choose these men? So again, if you go and see a therapist that can sort out your tendencies to get really anxious about these things and get triggered in that way, then you'll avoid this. And it will also be good to release all of those difficult, traumatic memories of the different breakups and people that have messed you around and all the rest of it, so that you're not kind of carrying that around with you and bringing it into the next relationship or dating situation that you get into. Because otherwise, every argument isn't just about that argument, it's about all of this. You've heard that expression, if you don't heal your wounds, you'll bleed over someone that doesn't cut you, like hasn't cut you, or bleed over the people that haven't cut you. So it's really important to actually understand yourself and understand the kind of person that you're dating, because that way you can avoid disappointment or hurt or wasting a lot of your time. And I think everybody can get secure, right? No one's, you will still have tendencies, like you're someone that likes a lot of connection, have a close relationship. You want a monogamous, long-term connection, whereas some people are a bit more polyamorous, or they like to just keep things casual. That's fine, as long as the communication is good. So you can have, no matter what type you are, and have one or the other kind of relationship. It's just that it's harder to do that when your attachment system gets triggered, and then you start doing those kind of protest behaviors in both direction, and therefore there's a bit of a push and pull thing going on. If both people are fine with a casual thing, that's fine, as long as they're communicating with that and setting their ground rules about what they will and won't do. Same with committed relationships. So understanding that. So if you found that helpful and you want to know more about that, you can read a book, which I would highly recommend. And there's lots of them, but this is the one that I think is probably a good for a beginner. And that would be something called Attached, right? So the book is called Attached. You can buy the book, you can buy the audio book. And I think it actually comes with a survey in it. There are surveys you can do online to see which type you are. But remember, you're not stuck as that type. And people are kind of changing all the time. But if you want to kind of change quickly and get that sorted out, then my suggestion is to deal with all of your unconscious baggage, especially from childhood and everything else. Because once you've done that, then you will find that you're more secure and less triggered when you get into a dating situation. So you can be more grounded and more self-assured about who you are, what you're looking for, and not regress back into all of the different patterns. And when someone is highly triggered and they get stuck in this situation where they kind of lose all rational thought, and they start acting very out of character. And once they've kind of recovered from the breakup or the relationship and they look back at themselves, they're like, what the hell was I thinking? Like, how could I get like that? How could I mess up my job? How could I get so invested? I turned into a bit of a stalker. I was absolutely obsessed with this person. And the answer is, it's because you weren't in that part of the brain. When you get triggered like that, you regress into who you were. Just like when you felt, and it comes from this, the idea of if you had a parent that was very aloof, not there for you, away a lot, not very affectionate, someone that, didn't really give you what you needed or was never there for you, then you might develop an avoidance style, right? Because you kind of copy that, or it could go the other way and you might get very anxious. If you had a parent that was very wrap you up in cotton wool, pandered to you, you feel reassured with that. And that turns into your intimate relationships as well. Like you need a certain level of reassurance and connection in order for you to still feel safe. And so you can understand where it comes back to. So if we resolve that at root cause, then it's not going to be about that anymore. You'll just be an adult, not regressing to doing childlike behaviors. And we've all seen grown adults having hissy fits. And then afterwards, like if you ask me, like you got quite worked up about that, and they're like, "I know, I can't help it. I just get like that when certain things happen." Or you hear people say, I seem to keep choosing the wrong kind of people. So understanding it is critical. So this is a really long video, but I hope that you found it helpful. If you want to know who wrote that book, it was Dr. Amir Levine and Rachel Heller, I think it is. It's called Attached. And I will carry on doing some videos on relationship types. And if you found this video helpful, give me a like. Tell me your thoughts about this and maybe share it, because the more this information gets out, the more people will be able to avoid disappointment or hurt or break the pattern that they have. If you need more one-on-one support and you're interested in that, you can go to my website, which is theliberatedmind.co.uk, and get in touch. I'd be more than happy to help you in a one-on-one capacity. Have a great day.